Hello everyone, I'm Chang. Hui and me will be presenting today about the Tian and Marcos article, which is a lexical focused on form study, comparing the effect of teacher code switching with English-only explanations on the vocabulary acquisition of Chinese university students. Here is an outline of our presentation. We'll firstly provide a background of this study. You could probably know some key terms in this section. Then we'll go straight into the research questions and the significance of this research. We'll focus on the method of this study as it's well designed and the researchers have been putting a lot of efforts in designing and conducting this research experiment. We can also learn from this research design as well, and maybe we can apply the knowledge for our further research projects. After studying the methodology, we'll learn the result and the conclusion of this study. After that, moving on to the final part about limitations, suggestions for further research, and critique of the research design. We'll use a discussion question to wrap up the presentation at the end. Whether the second language input should be provided in L2 only or using a mixture of learner's first language and the target language. This question has become a hot topic in recent decades, so that raised the importance of conducting research on teachers' code switching and to what extent could using first language in vocabulary learning input could facilitate learners' L2 vocabulary development. This research is based on an EFL context of learning English as learner's foreign language in a Chinese university to investigate and compare the effect of teachers' code switching and L2 exclusively input on learners' vocabulary acquisition. I'll introduce more about what is lexical focus on form in the next slides. Leffer and Gersay stated that form-focused instruction could be extended to vocabulary and was consistent with communicative teaching activities. In that sense, to distinguish the intentional learning with incidental learning, we could say intentional learning refers to if the learner is learning a word intentionally, the main focus of his or her attention is on the form-meaning relationship and the properties of that word, with the presumption that it will be acquired to some degree. Incidental learning refers to, in that case of vocabulary, if the learner is learning incidentally, his or her attention is focused on the message contained in the text or utterance rather than the form through which the message is conveyed. The three aims of the study is to explore the relative benefits of intentional vocabulary learning versus incidental vocabulary learning in a form-focused context. The second aim is to contribute to the debate on the use of first language in second language classrooms by providing empirical evidence of the effect by teachers' code switching on students' vocabulary learning, and to arrive at a good compromise between highly controlled experimental or laboratory conditions of research and the naturally occurring L2 classroom. The research question of these studies are to what extent is lexical focus on form beneficial during a focus on meaning activity such as listening comprehension activities in terms of students' receptive vocabulary learning. Is students' receptive vocabulary learning better facilitated by a teacher's use of code switching or by providing L2 only information? Do lower proficiency students benefit more than higher proficiency students from teachers' code switching? In other words, is the level of proficiency as a covariate of the potential gains made from either condition? Some research gaps were identified by Tian and Macro that instead of focusing on written texts, there are not much study about vocabulary teaching and learning in relation to oral texts. Tian and Macro also emphasize the importance of this research to provide findings that the effect of first language use in second language vocabulary learning. Only a few previous studies have mentioned this. The authors are not alone in identifying this, but Kaneko in 1992 stated that teachers who use a mixture of second language and first language would be beneficial for lexical and grammar acquisitions. This research also identified that the investigation of first language use by teachers in giving lexical input is under-researched. Existing studies only examine the use of first language in some aspects of L2 teaching, such as its effect on facilitating classroom interaction, and most of the research work conducted under a reading comprehension context. However, this research was based on the existing knowledge to study the effect of teacher code switching on learners' lexical acquisition in listening comprehension activities within the context of lexical focus on form.
Hi, I'm Hui. So let me talk about the rest of the part. The first one is methodology. This experiment adopted a quantitative research method because they use data to present research findings. I would like to explain methodology from 5 aspects: participants, procedures, instruments, type of data, and analysis. Firstly, the participants for this experiment were from a university in Shandong Province, China. They are all freshmen, majoring in English and all around 19 years old. Importantly, they were all from different provinces and they can represent intermediate English level, so geographic and economic differences can be controlled well. In addition, in this experiment, the teacher is also a very important factor. So researchers allowed one bilingual teacher to teach students so that they can control the interference from original teachers. What's more, 1.5 hours of teaching per week and a total of 9 weeks for research, 6 weeks for teaching intervention, 2 weeks for deleted test. Okay, this is the flowchart of this experiment. The researchers divided these participants into 4 proficiency levels, and then they randomly assigned these students from the 4 levels to the 3 different teaching conditions. So next, I would like to talk about the instructional intervention. The table above clearly shows the 3 teaching conditions, while the below one is a simplified version. In the first condition, no code switching, students only receive vocabulary input in second language. The second one is in code switching condition, students receive vocabulary input in both second language and the first language. And the last one is in control condition, students didn't receive any kinds of vocabulary input. Next, I will use this abbreviation for my further introduction, like NCS, CS, CONT. You can see the flowchart on the left. Different teaching conditions have different processes. The 3 conditions are the same for the first 2 steps, but after that, in NCS and CS condition, teacher play the recording again in segment and also vocabulary written on blackboard so that students can focus on new vocabulary. While in CONT condition, they just discuss listening comprehension. We then turn to the flowchart on the right. You can clearly see when the researchers took the pre-test, post-test, and deleted test. I just want to remind that researchers administered the baseline proficiency test and the vocabulary pre-test to the student before the instructional intervention began. Also, the students took the deleted test after 2 weeks. So next, you can see the 3 tests in this research. Vocabulary test as instrument. Appendix 1 is a vocabulary baseline test, which was designed by the researcher together with the post-test to measure the effectiveness of intervention. This test actually is very reliable because it scored at 0.75 alpha. And Appendix 5 is vocabulary knowledge scale used in all vocabulary tests. Appendix 4 is example of listening text showing target word. As I said before, the researchers use quantitative research method, so they collect quantitative data. Also, the researchers further process the data and obtain descriptive statistics, which were present in Table 1, while parametric statistics will be covered in my upcoming presentation. So we turn to the next part, results and the interpretation of analysis. We need to recall the research question mentioned earlier. For the first question, you can see the flowchart. To test the normal distribution of the data, the researchers use the KS test of normality, and then they can perform parametric statistics, a repeated measure ANOVA, by greenhouse gas estimate of sphericity, correct the degree of freedom. They found that time has a significant effect on results. Also, by Bonferroni multiple comparison, it showed that different performance in pre-test, post-test, and delayed test. Finally, after performing ANCOVA, the first question got the result. Lexical focus on phone is beneficial in meaning-focused activity. For the second question, the data of NCS and CS in Table 3, it is evident that lexical focus on phone appeared to improve their vocabulary knowledge in the 6 combined post-tests, but dropped it at delayed test. In order to test whether there is a between-group differences, by ANCOVA, they found that there was no significant group effect on post-test scores after controlling the effect of pre-test scores. However, there were no significant between the NCS and CS delayed test. So the result is teachers' code switching has positive effect on second language vocabulary acquisition. For the third question, the researchers first calculate the gain score made by each of the 2 treatment groups in combined post-test. You can see the Table 3. Then, using ANCOVA, they found that proficiency was not a significant covariate of the gain scores. Actually, all these research questions were addressed. You can just take a very quick look at these 3 results again. And then I would like to make a conclusion about this article. First one is lexical focus on phone is better than incidental learning. The second one is teachers' code switching has positive reinforcement to the learner's outperformance than providing second language only information. Learner's proficiency level has no cause and effect relation with second language acquisition. So let's move on next part. This research has 2 limitations. The first one, this experiment was highly controlled so that the result of this study would not be applied for a normal classroom context. And also, the test result is not reliable as students were being acknowledged about the target word in post-test. But this research also provides some suggestions for the further research. For the first one, whether there are any second language vocabulary need to be taught in first language instruction, and also similar research could be conducted in the future to build up the relationship between the teachers' code switching and the second language lexical teaching and learning. And that's all in my part. Thanks.
This research have a lot of strengths and contribution to the field of lexical focus on form. The first language use group, CS group, demonstrated stronger vocabulary gains as the group performance significantly improved in the immediate and delayed post-tests. These findings come in line with earlier studies in supporting of the benefits of the first language use in second language vocabulary learning. This research could also be duplicated, which many other researchers did similar research and their findings have shared results to some extent. This also consistent with Tian and Macro's results. Some aspects of their research were also doubted by other academics. which could also show that this topic is indeed worthy to be studied and provided insightful directions for future research. The structure of this research is super clear and concise, and the results were echoed with the research questions as well. We also found some weaknesses of this study, which the sample is a bit narrow to generalize the whole population. A lot of factors were excluded in the sampling method, such as learners' motivation, gender, language aptitude, learners' economic status, which might also influence their access to the language input, and all these factors could also influence the research results. Besides, the time range of delayed tests need to be elaborated. They might also need to specify how long will be defined as long-term retainment of the language input, and comparing the different performances in various time periods. When we consider the ethical issue, the research didn't mention whether the experiment has influenced students' final English score, as students in CONT group could have not exposed to any useful information during the class. Here is our references. And now last part is the discussion questions. First we got, can you think about any limitations about this research design? And we also got one backup question for you, which is, any thoughts for the implication of this research? You can choose either of them to discuss.